communication tool. So if you're going to be communicating with EPHI, that communication is protected through the DocBook MD software. Sorry if I was off screen there for a minute.
No, you weren't. The recorder was off.
Oh, all right.
That's all right.
So they'll watch from now. So anytime EPHI has to be exchanged between you, and it's not an emergency situation where you just don't have time to make sure you log in or anything like that, then use DocBook MD. Or if you switch that software to another, then we can change that in the policy. But the point is to use encrypted communications. You guys understand what I mean when I say encrypted communications? Okay.
Hey,
yes.
There's one thing about the DocBook that worth adding is that it is password protected, but if you're using it on your phone, using the app on your phone, you don't have to enter a password to get into DocBook. So,
Okay.
DocBook encourages people who use it to have a password on their phone.
On the phone,
have their
right.
phone locked.
And that should be already in the policy. It's not in the slides. It should already be in the policy, but if it's not, we do need to add that. You got that? And that's one thing, by the way. Thanks for doing the first one, Dr. Winder. But seriously, anybody who, if we address something that is more in your wheelhouse, that maybe when I talk with Sarah and Heather and Dr. Winder about the policies, that maybe you would know more about it than say, it's not quite right. Raise your hand and say something, because Sarah's taking notes. And over the next couple of days, we're going to do our first revisions to these policies. Or Heather's taking notes.
Heather's taking notes.
Somebody's taking notes.
Yeah.
And we're going to do our first revisions to these policies by the end of this week or early next week to add these things. So that's an important thing to check and make sure that we do have in the policies. I'm pretty sure we do, but if not, we need to add it for sure. That anybody using DocBook MD software or using your phone to access EPHI in any way, you've got to have that phone locked. Best practice, frankly, would be, I don't know if most of you guys have iPhones? iPhones? Okay. With an iPhone, you can change the settings to where your password just to access the phone itself is not just a 4-digit password, but like has the whole keyboard and you can type in words. I'm not going to make you do that because I tried it myself for a couple of weeks at our firm, because of our firm's HIPAA and other privacy policies, and it's ridiculous to try and do that every time you're trying to get into your phone. So we'll keep it as a 4-digit, but be aware, A, that at some point HHS may decide that you need to do the longer password, and B, that you do need to make absolutely sure that not anybody can just pick up your phone and swipe it and start using it. And obviously if you use the biometrics, that's fine, the thumbprint, that's fine too. But it needs to come with a password as well, obviously. Okay, and then EPHI that's on the Newborn Associates system, all of that is kept on servers, and that needs to stay that way. You can't be saving these things onto individual computer hard drives and reproducing EPHI for no reason, right? And that's common sense. We just want to make sure there's one copy and that it's on the server, which is itself encrypted. Communication between your email, we confirmed with your IT department, ICS, not department, your IT contractor, that all those are encrypted as well. Whenever you're communicating within, using your Newborn Associates computers and communicating with each other. I know doctors, you're not using the Newborn Associates computers that often, but those of you doing billing and that sort of thing, those are encrypted as well. So that's good because all that communication needs to be if possible. So because you guys have access to all these encrypted communications, you really need to make sure that unless it's an emergency, again, if there's an emergency situation, one healthcare provider needs to text another one, just say, hey, this patient needs our help right now and here's what's happening. If it's a medical emergency, a medical necessity, you absolutely don't need to take the time to open up the DocBook app and make sure, you can do what's quickest. But other than that, other than an emergency situation, it's important to use these encrypted communication tools if you're going to be sending EPHI. Okay? Questions? Questions? Fantastic. All right, so there are sanctions for folks who are responsible for PHI or EPHI falling into unauthorized hands, right? And it's a staged set of sanctions. First, if you're acting in, I fully trust that no one in here is going to get to the third one, which is where you're intentionally, publicizing someone's protected information. But that's the worst case scenario. If someone in bad faith with the intent to compromise the confidentiality, integrity, or availability, those are the three big words: confidentiality, integrity, availability of someone's PHI, then that's grounds for termination, right? Because you've actively chosen to violate the HIPAA policies. But assuming that's not the case, on the top you have someone who accidentally compromises the information of 10 or fewer individuals. An individual is the term that the regulations use to refer to patients, people whose PHI we have in our possession. 10 or fewer people, you just have to have sort of a refresher course to remind you of whatever specific policy might have been violated that led to the breach. If it's more than 10 individuals whose PHI is affected by your breach, you do the training, and then if it costs the company, if it costs Newborn Associates a significant amount of money to mitigate the breach, then the company does have the right, they're not required to, the company has the right to require the breaching employee to help pay for that breach, right? It's completely up to the discretion of Sarah? I don't know, of whoever would make that decision, whether they ask you to do that, but that is within the policies, that's within the rights of the company.
Where did the 10 individuals, where did that figure?
It's just that with 10 or fewer, the mitigation services that you're going to be providing is a small enough cost where, in discussions with Sarah and Heather, we just figured that was enough, and that was small enough where the company doesn't mind handling that cost every time. And if it's 15, it may be that, all right, this isn't going to cost that much, we're not going to ask this person to pay. If it ends up being 300 and it's really going to be a big hit, then you might figure something out. But it's purely on how much it costs. That's the main difference. And frankly, if it's 10 or fewer, the amount of time you would need us to work on it to help you and that sort of thing is going to be much lower. Because the regulation, if it's under 500, that's a step. We're going to get to that in a few minutes, but under 500 people affected, then there are a couple of steps that we have to take, one in particular that you don't have to do, that you do in terms of notification if it's 500 or more. Which, I'm sure some of you have seen, if you follow industry news and stuff, Community Health and some other entities have had hackers from China get access to many tens of thousands of people's information. And so that's kind of the big scary situation that we're trying to avoid. You probably don't have tens of thousands of people's information in your system, and you wouldn't be a target for a big time hacker like that probably, but still, you certainly have more than 500 patients in your historical files, and so and that's where it triggers a bigger notification requirement. So. Okay, so everyone who works for Newborn Associates is authorized to access paper or paper or electronic PHI to the minimum extent necessary to perform your duties, right? And that's another common sense thing. It just doesn't make any sense. It doesn't help anything. It doesn't fit within the meaning of the regulations for someone who works here to peruse people's PHI for reasons unrelated to what they do, right? So if you do billing, for example, you have every right and an obligation, clearly, to access individuals' PHI to the extent necessary to perform your billing function. And once you have done that, you also have an obligation to close that off your computer and not leave it out for people to see and take good care of it, right? The computer system is set up so that, or and we work with ICS to do this, and if it's not set up yet, it will be shortly. So that you have to use your username and password to log into a workstation. I know that's already the case. And of course, your username and password tells the computer system who you are and what you have access to. So if someone, I know that currently you don't have any employees that don't have some need for PHI in their work. But if somehow you hired a person to purely be a receptionist or something along those lines, who you would never ask that person to do any billing, you'd never ask that person to do anything related to PHI, that person's username and password would not have access to folders on the computer system that have PHI with them, right? So that's how the username and password system keeps people's information safe. The security officer, Heather, is in charge of supervising use of and access to ePHI. ICS will provide Heather with a report every so often. I think the specific timing is in your policies, but every so often ICS will let Heather know, who's been how often people log in, that sort of thing, what they're accessing. And it's not supposed to be like a big brother nanny state situation. It's just the security officer has a responsibility to make sure she knows, whose user. I mean, for example, if someone's username and password is being used at an odd time of day, and that person doesn't know anything about it, then that might mean that person's been hacked. We need to do something about it. That sort of thing. And then, of course, if any of you observe anything with respect to the integrity of any patient's PHI, if you see that someone has left their computer screen in plain view with a patient file open on it, something along those lines, I'm not trying to turn everybody into tattletales, but you need to, close the computer down and let the person, if you don't know who did it, then you can just report it to Heather and say, look, I don't know what's happening, but just letting you know that this was happening, because then it doesn't have to be like singling someone out, especially if there's no breach resulting from it, but Heather then will have a responsibility to send an email to everybody or to have a meeting and just say, guys, remember, this is very important, we got to be careful about this. So she needs to be on top of all that, and she needs to know if you see some irregularity that she's not privy to. Okay, so obviously some PHIs we discussed earlier is available on various technological devices, workstations, phones, tablets, and we also brought up already that the usernames and passwords have been authorized by the security officer to the extent that your job requires the use of PHI, right? So the main point of this section of the policies is that Heather is in charge of managing who's authorized to see what, right? So, and in y'all's case, it's as simple as an email or a call to ICS, right? It's Heather calls ICS and says, all right, this person doesn't need to be able to get into these folders, and so ICS can lock those folders for that individual, something like that. So I know that that Mississippi Children's Heart is the only area in which anyone here is doing, not here, but anyone in this practice is doing treatment outside of the hospital. But we have NextGen technology, which is another password protected software to access PHI there. In your office, obviously not patients around, there's not visitors around that often who could, get on your workstations, but do make sure that your computers are locked when we get to that in a minute. And again, if you're going to access PHI on your personal device, unless it's an emergency, please make sure you're using an encrypted software such as DocBook. Okay, I mentioned this earlier, but Heather, not me anymore unless she wants me to, but Heather will do a refresher version of this, especially highlighting any changes that have been made to the HIPAA policies over the previous year on a yearly basis to make sure that it stays fresh in everybody's mind. Sorry about that. Okay. Another security feature with the computer system is that it's not going to give you or anyone trying to pretend to be you endless guesses for how many times, for what your password is, how many times you get on the computer. So if you have forgotten your password and you try 4 times to come up with it and you're unable to, don't try that 5th time unless you're so sure that you're going to get it right, because otherwise your username is going to be locked out, and I believe it's a 15-minute period before you can try again. And ICS, of course, will be notified whenever that happens, and Heather will be notified. The likelihood, of course, the reason for that is we expect that if someone tries 5 times and doesn't get it, that it might possibly be someone pretending to be you and not you, and so Heather can investigate that. If it is you, make sure you tell Heather immediately, hey, I tried to log in and I got cocky and tried a 5th time and I couldn't do it. And then ICS can help you reset your password. Okay, speaking of passwords, Sarah got you a 1-year deal with your password. I tried to make it 3 months, but Sarah got you 12 months. You can all thank Sarah later. But every 12 months, ICS is supposed to be setting up your system. You guys just need to check with them, but ICS is supposed to be setting up your Windows system to where every 12 months, when you try to log on with your password, it's going to give you a little, your password will expire in 14 days. Would you like to change it now? In my office, it's every 3 months. And every 3 months when that happens, I always say no, because I use my password for all the days I'm allowed to, and then on the day that it expires, I log in and it literally pops up with a new screen and says, you have to change your password right now before it'll let you do anything else. That's going to happen for you guys too. I'm sorry, but that's best practice. Best practices in the security, in technological security, is to change your passwords as frequently as possible. So if you think to change it more often than you're required to, then good on you. But you're going to be required to every 12 months. And then every 6 months you need to change your passwords to the encrypted communications software like DocBookMD and NextGen, because those are purely for the access and sharing of PHI. So it's even more important that those passwords be changed. So every 6 months you're supposed to be required to change those. And then, and I know nobody wants to hear this, but don't write down your passwords. And if you have your passwords written down, go back to the office this afternoon and change them and tear up your written down passwords. And because what's the point of having a password if someone can just open the drawer next to your computer and find out what it is, right? We have a guilty party. Okay, so I understand they're hard to remember, and there are apps you can get that will store multiple passwords for you, and you just have to remember one password to log into your app. I would recommend researching those, get something like that. You could write yourself a clue to your password. You could write that down and put it in the desk drawer that no one would understand but you. But don't just write down your password and leave it there, and certainly don't tell anyone else what your password is. Okay? Got it? Because that's the point of passwords, that no one else knows them. All right, so what happens if there's a security incident involving PHI or ePHI? All right, so the regulations define what a breach is and isn't. Okay, and we don't need to get into the gory details with you, because anytime Heather thinks there might have been a breach, she's going to call me anyway, and I will help you walk through it. But as a general 30,000-foot view, a breach is any time PHI or ePHI comes into the hands of an unauthorized person without the knowledge or without the agreement of Newborn Associates. And of course that's redundant, because if you have the agreement of Newborn Associates in an appropriate way, then they're not an unauthorized person anymore, right? So when unauthorized people access PHI, that is a breach. It is not a breach, however, if someone here accidentally sees something they're not supposed to and puts it away or closes it or doesn't do anything with it. That's not a breach. It's not a breach if one of you physicians accidentally shows a chart or drops a chart and another physician who's not part of the group sees it, that's not a breach because that person's also covered by HIPAA responsibilities. Or another covered entity, another one of the hospital staff or something like that who's also covered by HIPAA. That wouldn't necessarily be a breach. A breach is if it goes outside of sort of the HIPAA bubble in a manner that's unauthorized. Does that make sense? Okay, so if the breach happens, we're first going to mitigate any harm resulting from the breach, whether that harm has already been caused or is likely to result. So what's that mean? If a person's financial or personally identifiable information is breached, I'll give you a quick example. Another practice that we represent here in town, doctor had some paper files in his briefcase because he was taking them home to look at them to prepare for patient appointments the next day. And he stopped at a restaurant for lunch and his car was stolen with the briefcase inside, right? Police recovered the car very quickly. The briefcase appeared to have been completely untouched, but for a period of a few hours there were 4 patient files in the possession of a person who 99% didn't even know he had them, right? But we notified all 4 people that their information had been possibly compromised, that their personal information was included in the PHI that was in the car, and we offered them 1 year of free credit monitoring, just in case this person had looked at their social security numbers and decided to try and get a credit card or something on their names. So that's the kind of thing that's exactly the example that we'll do as well. If someone's financial or personal information, Newborn Associates will offer that person 1 year of credit monitoring at our expense, or the expense could be our insurer may cover it depending on the situation. And then of course make any effort. I mean, if this is a paper file or digital files, whatever it is, make every effort possible to retrieve or recreate the PHI. And of course we can rely on, if we have lost our only copy, there are backup copies and all these encrypted software programs that we can use to try and recover that information if we've lost it. And then of course the regulations also require that we notify in a very specific way the people who are affected. I just mentioned that we had done that in this other situation. We'll do the same thing. And there's a list of specific ways, and I believe it's in your policies, but the regulations have a specific requirements for how you do that notification, both the form of communication and what the content of that notification is. We'll do that for the individuals who are affected, and also we have to report it to HHS. HHS has an online form that is actually really simple. I know that's shocking, but it really is pretty simple. And if it happens, Heather and I will probably just spend some time on a conference call working through exactly what happened and submit that to HHS. And that's all we have to do if it's 499 or fewer people affected. If it's more, then we have to also report it to the media, which is fun. But, and again, I think there's more detail on that later on, although there's a lot of slides, sorry about that. But, okay, so an emergency situation, should there be some sort of a power outage, technical breakdown, something along those lines? Obviously, our security features are powered by, electricity, just like everything else. And so in emergency mode, if Windows is running on emergency mode, or ICS is running our computer system on emergency mode, our security system is not as strong as it is when it's running normally. So only people who absolutely have to get to someone's PHI to provide care to a patient should access it during an emergency mode time. Of course, Heather will be in charge of notifying everyone that we're in emergency mode if that should happen. Situations, this would come up, hurricane, tornado, something like that comes through and causes our computer system to go down, something along those lines. That would be sort of, Heather will say, guys, we're in emergency mode, nobody get on your computers if you don't absolutely have to. If you're just using it for billing, I know billing is very important, I don't mean just, but if the only thing you use it for is for billing or something that's not directly related to providing medical care to a patient, just wait till emergency mode has passed, should be pretty quick, and then get back into the system. All right, any questions on anything so far?
Let me just, clarification, the physicians and the nurse practitioners, they really are not in our office and don't access our computers and all that.
Right.
They are under the hospital policies when they're actually at the hospital, not newborn,
Right.
correct?
Which, yes, that's correct, and, well, I mean, yes, that is correct, but the PHI generated at the hospital becomes newborn PHI when it's sent to you guys for billing.
Okay.
Does that make sense? So, all these policies really do need to be, are relevant, I think, throughout all that everyone's doing. It's just that there's gonna be a lot of overlap. I mean, for example, if we're talking about the emergency contingency plan, if the hospital power, I mean, if the newborn associate's power goes down, that's not gonna affect you NPs and physicians who are out at the hospitals making new PHI, right? Like keeping up a chart and providing care to patients. And once that, if I understand it correctly, once that PHI is at the newborn associate's office, you guys aren't accessing it anymore, right? It's just being used for billing, and you're going to add to it as you provide more care to the patient and add to their file, but you're not drawing from the newborn associate server to provide that care. Is that correct? Right. So the emergency contingency plan is a good example of what you're talking about, Sarah, because what really matters for y'all is, of course, the hospital situation. If Women's here has a power outage and goes down, and you guys need to be able to access patient PHI to provide care for them, then certainly the Women's HIPAA emergency plan is what will apply, because Newborn Associates doesn't own that PHI yet, right? But yeah, that's a good point. Does that make sense? Perfect. All right, moving on. Heather will also have responsibility every 3 years or possibly more frequently to evaluate these policies. And I'm telling you all this just so you know how hard Heather's going to be working. And one of you might become the security officer in the future. But security officer has to evaluate policies every 3 years or so in light of any change. And in 3 years, obviously, you may have none of the computers at your office that you have now. You may have a different IT contractor, ICS. You may have, you certainly will have different business associates, I'm sure, and other vendors that you do work with. We'll talk about business associates in a minute. And if there's a major change, for example, if you do leave ICS, or if you, if HIPAA is overhauled, which it recently was, so it shouldn't be again anytime real soon, but if there's an overhaul in the regulations themselves or the statutes, then Heather also needs to do an early evaluation in that situation. I said we would talk about business associate later. We're going to talk about it right now. All right. Does anyone know what a business associate is under HIPAA? I see head nodding.
It's like the ICS, I think, isn't it?
That is one good example, yes.
Collection agency?
Absolutely. Any business that you work with that is either providing a service to newborn associates or providing a service on behalf of newborn associates, for whom it is with whom it is necessary to share PHI for them to perform those tasks, right? And that's just, and that is not and the entity we're talking about is not a member of the newborn associates workforce. So one of you doing things on behalf of newborn associates, obviously you're not a business associate. I mean, I guess that wasn't obvious until I just said that, but you're not a business associate. But the two examples, collection agency, if you turn over someone's bill to collections, ICS, DocBook MD, whoever makes that software, I spoke to them in crafting these, NextGen, people who have access to your PHI, or even just a company that you use to shred old documents. A lab, although a lab would probably be a covered entity too, but the point is, any business that you're providing PHI to, you need a business associate agreement. And that's another document that Heather and Sarah and I have worked on, and we have a template that is attached, is it attached as an exhibit to, it's not, okay, so it's a separate document, but you can, anybody who wants to see one, Heather has it. It is a contract template that we will ask or have asked any vendor that qualifies as a business associate to sign. And it basically says they will take as good care of the PHI as we will, right? I mean, that's a requirement. We have to have it in writing that they'll be just as responsible for it as we are. Okay. So we have several kinds of safeguards for the under the security rule. One of them is the physical safeguards. So this is just another security officer responsibility that I want to flag for everybody. If there is an issue with losing some PHI, which again we might not know who has it, if anyone has it, but if it's just it's not turning up in the computer system, we can't find the paper file, whatever it is, then, I mean, well, ePHI, I guess specifically for this issue, that ICS or whatever IT contractor we're using should have backup of it. And the security officer is responsible for making sure that that contact is made immediately to try and recover that information. And then, of course, it says Mississippi Children's aren't here, but at any time that at any hospital setting or patient treatment setting that a similar thing happens, then that would be subject to the HIPAA policies of that facility. All right. Our facility, as has been brought up already, is a small office that patients don't come to, and mostly, what percentage of days is it just Newborn Associates employees that even set foot in the door?
Every day.
Like 95%? I come sometimes.
Yeah, you do come.
Okay. So 99% of days that I'm not there, it's only you guys that are in your office. Maybe the UPS guy? So, there's no need to kind of craft a waiting room situation like there is at some medical practices. So that's nice. So it's a very simple set of policies. We're basically saying lock every entrance that's not the main entrance, and that someone should be able to see the main entrance throughout the day. There's someone at that front desk that knows who's coming and going. We also need to have signs posted to the extent that there are people coming into the office. If no one's there ever, and the signs are an eyesore, you can just have them off to the side. But if you know you're having someone come into the office, make sure the signage is up and prominent in 24-point font saying exactly what it says here. In accordance with our security and privacy obligations under HIPAA, only authorized personnel or visitors escorted by authorized personnel are allowed beyond this point. So you want to put just the one sign behind that front desk saying those exact words. Prefer that it stay up at all times, but if you want to just hold it up when someone's coming, that's up to you. You can make it look nice if you want to. I have no advice on how to do that, but I'm saying if you want to. All right, Sarah's all over. Okay, alarm system. You have an alarm system, and we just, you might be wondering, why would we even put this in the policies? Why just make a statement that we have an alarm system? Well, the reason, of course, is in case of audit, right? If OCR knocks on the door and says, Heather, you're the security officer, please show me your HIPAA policies. The first thing they're going to look at is, did you do a risk analysis? We do have a description of the risk analysis we did. The second thing they're going to look at is, what do the policies say? And so some of this is writing for an OCR investigator. So they can say, okay, all right, good, you have, that answers that question. You got a security system. They don't need to ask. And it shows up, we're trying to show them that we're thorough and that we're serious about enforcing these policies. Then obviously, of course, it's not really relevant to the present situation, because everyone who's currently employed by Newborn Associates does need access to at least some PHI. But to the extent that some folks were hired that had a purely administrative role that had no need for PHI at all, those persons should not have keys to the facility, should not have access to it when other staff is not around. And of course, don't make copies of your keys if you have keys to the facility and give them to anybody that's not authorized.